Broadcasts of Brannon House.
Colonel Rob Maness has a lifelong record of providing dedicated service to this nation. Having worked his way up from the enlisted ranks to full colonel, he served our country for more than 32 years. He has served as a bomber squadron commander, bomb disposal technician, Joint Chiefs of Staff Operations Officer, assisted the National Security Team with the campaign plan for the global war on terrorism. He authored the first theater nuclear war plan and served as the Vice Commander of America's largest airborne intelligence wing. Colonel Rob Maness is a true American hero. This is Rob Maness Live.
3 civil rights organizations are suing a group of far-right Colorado election conspiracy theorists. This suit alleges the group intimidated voters as they went door-to-door searching for non-existent fraud in the 2020 election. The suit was filed by Colorado's NAACP chapter, the League of Women Voters, and Mi Familia Vota against the group that calls themselves the U.S. Election Integrity Plan. The suit claims that USEIP intimidated voters by showing up at their doors with guns and badges. USEIP is also accused of taking pictures of people's homes. A number of election audits, including by former President Trump's own Department of Justice, found no widespread fraud in the 2020 election. The far-right group based out of Colorado says they plan to expand their door-to-door canvassing to other states like Arizona and Georgia.
Yep, citizens are fighting NGO Lawfare. Welcome to Truth Thursday here on the Rob Maness Show, and we're live on Worldview Tube, our X Spaces simulcast, Rumble, YouTube, Truth Social Plus, Amazon Fire, and now Apple TV. That's a new one, and Roku. And stay tuned for more of that because this network, Worldview Tube, is growing faster than any other independent streaming network, and you're going to see here in the future that we're right next to other networks that are independent, like maybe our competitor, Real America's Voice, and those kind of networks. So we're running, we're going, and we're on top of it because we bring you the facts and the truth. And the network is from a Christian worldview led by Brandon House, my friend and the CEO of the organization. Well, what if I told you that USAID and DHS funded non-government organizations, NGOs, those NGOs we talked about in the title you just heard in the clip. And they are suing citizens just because they tried to confirm the public voter rolls in a state. Do you know that NGOs suing over civil rights never have to pay any court costs when they lose? Citizens are being lawfared using an old law designed to attack the KKK. And are automatically defamed by the media, such as NPR, and that little local station that you just heard there defamed them as violent and intimidating, racist, and white supremacists, amongst other things. All of this is true. A group of volunteer citizens, including veterans, set out to verify addresses and individuals on Colorado's voter rolls as a nonpartisan civics project and found themselves in this lawsuit you just heard about by several NGOs, and they include the NAACP, and it's designed to smear them as racist and election deniers. Oh, there's the pejorative. You question an election, you're an election denier. Of course, Stacey Abrams from Georgia, isn't it right? Isn't she the governor of Georgia still? Well, my guest today is one of those citizens, Holly Kaysen. Ms. Kaysen is an entrepreneur founding an e-tech startups and citizen action organizations, and is one of the founders of the group you just heard about that we're going to talk about today in this lawsuit from the NAACP, the Election Integrity Project. Holly, welcome to the Rob Maness Show.
Thank you for having me, Colonel Rob.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming on and talking about this. I mean, you and Sean and Ash, I believe, are the 3 primary defendants in this law case I wanted to chat with you about as we talk about this issue today. And isn't Sean a veteran?
He is. He's a 25-year outstanding service member in the U.S. Air Force. He's a colonel as well. Yeah. That's
right. I remember reading that. So talk just a little bit more about your background. You helped found the EIP organization. You founded some others too. So just tell the audience a little bit about yourself and your background before we dive totally into this issue.
Well, professionally, I'm a tech startup founder. I build businesses. That's what I really enjoy doing. And I come from a family of entrepreneurs, so it's pretty natural that I would be, starting things up. In addition to, starting up businesses, I also helped found Operation Shelter, which was a very recent program where we, in conjunction with the Sean Hendricks, you guys might know who he is. He's an outdoor influencer. We raised over $500,000 for Helene victims when FEMA was failing those desperate folks in North Carolina. And I've also co-founded the U.S. Election Integrity Plan, which is, it's not even really an organization. You could call it more of a book club. We don't have officers and departments and bylaws and that sort of thing. We never raised any money. It was 100% volunteer. And USEIP was dedicated to finding the truth, sharing the truth, and fixing our elections in our own backyards. So that's that activity, and working with USEIP and actually being one of the founders is what got me into the crosshairs of the NAACP, the League of Women Voters, and Mi Familia Vota.
Yeah, so let's get to the ground truth of, and you've already touched on some of it. You're 100% volunteers. You didn't raise any money. What was your mission, and why were you on that mission?
Well, we did a lot of work in Colorado, and it was basically grassroots citizens that would want to work on election issues in their own county. So we never gave anybody any real direction to say, yes, this is what we're doing, or this is what you should do. We kind of flipped that idea on its head and said, look, if you're working in your county and you want to fix your elections or, engage with your county clerk, whatever it might be, we are here to help. And so we basically set up just a network of people that were working on election issues. So in 2021, it turned out that there were several counties in Colorado that wanted to canvass their counties to find out whether or not the state voter data was accurate. So we brought that project into USEIP and designed basically an academic study to determine whether or not what we were told by the digital records that were publicly available from the Secretary of State's office matched up with the in real life data that we were collecting.
So you're basically canvassing, you take the public voter rolls, which is public information. There's no secret about it, right? And you show up at the door of the addresses on there, knock on the door and say, hey, we're doing a survey to confirm the information is correct. Is that accurate?
That's exactly it. And because it was the work was done by volunteers in their local areas, it was basically neighbors talking to neighbors. It wasn't like we had this, flood of people coming in from out of state and paid activists, anything like that. It was really just neighbors talking to neighbors, confirming that, as you said, publicly available data.
Yeah, and let's I want to talk about this throughout the show, but you did do a report. What was the overall conclusion that you found out during this process?
Well, it was extremely embarrassing to the Secretary of State because we found an 8 to 14% error rate in the election data. And what those errors looked like, they were anomalies. It was issues like ballots had been mailed to a home with an address that didn't match, or ballots were mailed to an address where a person didn't live. Then we had some folks who claimed that they had voted and their their vote hadn't been recorded in the Secretary of State's database, and then vice versa. Some people had said, I never voted, but there was a vote cast in their name. It was anomalies like that that we found, which contribute to that overall error rate. And one thing I should mention is that our study was really scientific and academic. It wasn't just a bunch of people running around knocking on doors, looking for fraud and trying to report people who had said they voted and they didn't, or vice versa to local officials. That wasn't it at all. It was extremely rigorous in how we collected that data because we wanted the most fidelity in our data so we could extrapolate our results for the entire state and have those records hold up in court if local folks wanted to take legal action.
How did you build the rigorous nature of into your processes? Because 100% volunteers. Look, I've done statewide campaigns as a candidate with my own campaign, and having enough volunteers to go door to door across the state, that's a big job.
It was.
So how did you build that to the data from a process?
From a process standpoint, it was all volunteer, and people were organizing locally, and then we had training manuals for the questions that were to be asked, and it was very brief, as you mentioned. We'd knock on a door and say, "Is this home? Are you a voter?" Show them the data and say, does this comport with your recollection of how you voted in the 2020 election? And I should say it was a retrospective study. It wasn't looking forward, and it wasn't talking about who did you vote for. It's did you vote, and did you vote by mail or in person? Now, the rigor around it was designed by Colonel Sean Smith. He did quite a bit of the training. And then we had a data expert. We call him on our team Data Jeff. And he was doing the statistical sampling to make sure that the bias was taken out and we were sampling at a high enough rate that we could extrapolate across the state. And then we had some other volunteers, corporate trainers. And there were actually quite a few former military folks, vets who were like, this is how you structure this kind of information gathering operation. So it was mainly people who do this kind of work professionally, and they just volunteered their time and knowledge for this volunteer project.
Yeah. So how big is the voter file at the time, and what was your samples?
We knocked on over 10,000 doors, and the overall voting population, I believe, in Colorado was around 3 million for the entire state.
Okay. All right. And of that 10,000 doors, did you achieve close to 100% completion rate with somebody actually there that you could talk to?
I believe I never canvassed. That's kind of what's funny about this whole lawsuit is I was accused of going door to door armed and all that stuff. I never canvassed because I live so far away from everybody. I live out in the boondocks. So I believe the completion rate was somewhere around 5,000, about half. And then we also had some follow-up visits just to cure some of the data. And we did go through quite a bit of a curing process to make sure that the data that we did have was of a high fidelity.
Yeah, because you want to be right. This is 2021, so it's just post 2020. Thinking of the context of that, those of us on the Republican side are not convinced that our systems have integrity and security, and that the election wasn't stolen from Donald Trump in 2020. So, you want to be precise. You want to be right in your conclusion too. So, we got to take our first break, Holly. When we come back, though, I want to talk about how your team and others you've come in contact might feel about how this is censorship. And that'll be the opening clip from the next segment. We'll be right back on the Rob Maness Show. We're talking with one of the founders of the Election Integrity. Holly Case.
You know, we would talk about this on Wake Up America for years. You know, if you weren't in line with the thinking of the CDC about vaccines, everything you did was suppressed, including posts on social media. It turns out this is not like a pat on the back, but we were right. We were right. I can remember having a conversation about Joe Biden and just saying, you know, Mercedes, I'm not a doctor. And they say that. You're not a doctor. How dare you diagnose the president? And I'd say, look, I'm not a doctor, but I do have eyes and a brain. And what I see is telling me this guy's not okay. Turns out we were right about that, too.
Well, Dr. Finnerty, I'm glad that, we're right and they're wrong on this. But look, there's such a broader situation here, which is a fact. And there's a term that they use, the whole of society, where you have the government basically coordinating with NGOs, with other institutions, with social media companies to basically drive certain narratives and censor those who question you, those who don't agree with you, and suppress other political ideas. And we saw this vividly play out during the COVID period of time. And it was obviously always the conservatives. Conservatives couldn't raise questions on issues of election fraud in certain states. It couldn't raise questions basically countering individuals, health officials like Dr. Fauci. And so it became incredibly problematic when you had these social media companies also being part of the scheme to shut down conservative voices. And Ben is right to bring this up in terms of what's happening in Europe and in many other countries. You look at Latin America, for example, in Brazil, where they've been in battle with Elon Musk and X, and you've had these Supreme Court radical leftist judges trying to shut him down. So this fight is not only a fight that we have to continue moving forward and improving here in America to protect free speech, but it's a fight that we also have to bring to light on the global scale.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show here on Worldview Tube and our X Spaces simulcast and a whole lot of other places, including Truth Social Plus. And today is Truth Thursday, and we're talking with one of the founders of the Election Integrity Project, who's been sued by three NGOs, the NAACP, the League of Women Voters, and Mi Familia Vota, for what? Checking and confirming some data that's publicly available on things called voter rolls in Colorado. And Colorado is one of the states that you heard Mercedes Schlapp talk about, the certain states when it came to the election narrative and conservatives not being able to talk about it. And this particular lawfare is in the civil courts. My guest today is Holly Kaysen, one of those founders who's also an entrepreneur and has a lot of experience starting up companies and NGOs and nonprofits. And Holly, I meant to thank you for your work with Operation Shelter. Sean Hendricks, I've had Sean on my show, I think 3 times now, to talk about his efforts in Western North Carolina. That's where my dad's family is originally from. And so they're my people, and I really appreciate all the help you've done on that. So I wanted to ask you how your team felt at the time, and maybe even still feels, because I perceive it, that this effort is an attempt to one of the goals is to censor your speech so that your story, which is a factual story about election integrity in the context of the 2020 election, seriously, can't be told. You guys
That's
feel
right. We do. And what we found out as we were going through the litigation process is that there was a broader strategy at play. It was these NGOs were not just trying to stop us in particular from canvassing. They use that as the predicate for the lawsuit. But what they were really trying to do is redefine the KKK Act and the Voting Rights Act. And what they were attempting to do is use those voting intimidation and civil rights laws as an end run around the First Amendment. So canvassing is a well-protected American right, and it's protected under the First Amendment, and it's well litigated. And really, when we talk about canvassing, all we're talking about is going door to door and talking to your neighbor face to face. You have the right to do that and talk about whatever you want. You can't threaten your neighbors. You can't, harm them, but you can talk about any topic you want. And the lawsuit that these NGOs brought against us was a very crafty attempt at circumventing the First Amendment by conflating our version of canvassing with voter intimidation. They tried to conflate the two. And ultimately, I think this was a broader play to be able to set a precedent so anyone who is canvassing, whether you're a candidate or a nonprofit trying to raise money for, Save the Whales or a Girl Scout selling cookies, they wanted to have control over that interaction. And they wanted the government to be able to prosecute people who they didn't want to be able to go door to door and talk to their neighbors.
Yeah, so voter intimidation is not just a civil issue, that's a crime.
That's right.
Were there attempts to indict you guys in criminal court?
It's interesting you asked that question because we did not know until just a few months before trial, but the Deputy Secretary of State, Chris Beall, he was Jenna Griswold's deputy in Colorado. He had initiated an investigation into a complaint that was made out in Mesa County, Colorado, that had no connection to us whatsoever. But they launched this investigation into this benign complaint, and it included the Secretary of State's office, the Colorado AG, the DOJ, the local law enforcement in Mesa County, and the Mesa County DA. Now, we had never canvassed in Mesa County. We had never knocked on any doors. That was not a place that USEIP had ever canvassed. Mm-hmm. But they did launch this major campaign, and the plaintiffs entered this exculpatory evidence into our lawsuit, but it was fully redacted. Now, it took us, Ash and I ended up firing our lawyers, actually it was 2 months before we were going to go to trial, and then we got an extension. So we had 6 months between when we fired our lawyers and went to trial. And in that 6-month period, I happened to get lucky and resurface the copy of this email chain between all these law enforcement entities that was unredacted. And it turned out to be kind of the kill shot to the plaintiff's case.
So they tried to insert redacted information into the civil trial. Let me make sure I have this right. And there's this process called discovery that both sides are supposed to get access to. And there's a lot of really strong rules around discovery. One of them is, if I remember correctly, and I'm not an attorney, but I've done military as a court martial authority, So if I remember right, it's for the express purpose of revealing potential exculpatory evidence to the side that is interested in exculpating itself, right?
That's right. And what's even crazier about this is that the plaintiffs named the Secretary of State as one of their witnesses very early on in the proceedings, probably a month and a half after the lawsuit was filed. Jenna Griswold's name was one of the plaintiffs' witnesses. So they knew, the plaintiffs knew, or they had to have known, that there was no connection between us, USEIP, Sean, Ash, and I, and this alleged complaint in Mesa County. Well, fast forward to trial, this woman who filed the complaint to the Secretary of State was the plaintiff's star witness. They had no other witnesses whatsoever to support these claims that we were racist, violent, intimidating, nothing. And so they proceeded to trial knowing this, knowing that their star witness had been basically put on the stand to perjure herself.
Wow. So is this complaint where the media kept getting that you showed up with guns and badges, that kind of, it's this one witness? That's interesting. In my research on this case, every media reporting on it, whether it's print or video, and you saw the best one that I could find at the beginning of the show, that local television station, said that you guys had showed up with guns and badges to intimidate the voters, and so it's completely off the rails there. So
completely fabricated. Yeah, the whole investigation, the whole criminal investigation had been completed 6 to 8 months before the lawsuit was even filed.
So another question I have is these three specific NGOs, the NAACP, League of Women Voters, and the Family of VOTA, do you think they were chosen by somebody for a specific reason? Is there a known reason why it's those three? I mean, because Colorado doesn't exactly have a race problem, do they?
I don't think so. What we did find out in discovery is that the League of Women Voters, the lead counsel from the League of Women Voters, was the one to spin this case up. And she brought the case theory to the local president of the League of Women Voters in Denver. And then from there, that plaintiff, her name is Beth Hendricks, she was charged with going out and enrolling other groups, civil rights groups or voting rights groups, to enjoin the lawsuit. And it's a strange combination of groups. I mean, yes, they have overlapping agendas, but in my research, I never saw them doing joint events or sharing information. They weren't actually much of a team or a coalition here in Colorado. Now, on the national level, they are. And you see Mi Familia Vota, the League of Women Voters, and the NAACP, and a number of different combinations filing these voter intimidation lawsuits in other states. It's a common practice of theirs to file these types of lawsuits.
Yeah, that raises another question. Look, I'm from the South, so I'm very familiar with that tactic because they do it in the southern states every opportunity they can get. I mean, the big stick is voter suppression of black voters. Historically, is what they try to say is happening, and they go through everything, from district lines to this kind of activity. But what's really interesting is and maybe you can answer this. Why did they, after the break, I'm gonna ask this, and then after the break you can answer the question. Why the KKK law? I'm curious about that and what you guys were told and what you saw in Discovery. We'll be right back with Holly Kaysen, who is a founder of the Election Integrity Project that was sued by the NAACP League of Women Voters, and they're fighting that lawsuit. And I think they're winning. We'll be right back.
Hello, I'm Brandon House. Is the government tracking you? Do they have access to all your data? Well, if you go to worldviewtalk.com, you'll find out about a cell phone company that, well, does not store your data. They don't do that. This is what they're known for. They don't store your data. You have privacy. You're not being tracked. That's why a lot of folks are turning to worldviewtalk.com. You'll find their prices are very competitive. All the details are there at worldviewtalk.com. Again, worldviewtalk.com. Oh, while you're there, not only do they have cell phones that aren't tracking you, you can find out about how to get a satellite phone. Should the whole system go down and you want to communicate with a family member or a loved one, you might want to have a satellite phone. Or how about their solar generators? They have great solar generators. Check them all out right now. Worldviewtalk.com, worldviewtalk.com.
It's kind of a hack to the system where, someone can get an NGO stood up for a fairly small amount of money. Like George Soros was really good at this. Like George Soros is like a system hacker. Like he figured out how to hack the system. He's a genius at arbitrage. These days he's pretty old, but a genius at arbitrage. So he figured out that you could leverage a small amount of money to create a nonprofit, then lobby the politicians to send a ton of money to that nonprofit, so you can take what might be, a $10 million donation to a nonprofit to create a nonprofit and leverage that into $1 billion NGO. And a nonprofit is a weird word. It's just a non-governmental organization. And then the government continues to fund that every year. And it'll have a nice sounding name, like the Institute for Peace or something like that. But really, it's a graft machine.
And what are the requirements with that money? What do they have to do?
Just really no requirements at all.
So they just get grants and the government just assumes that they're doing good work.
I think a lot of people in the government know that they're not doing good work. But it's a giant graft machine.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show here on Worldview Tube and our X Spaces simulcast. And it's Truth Thursday. And look, we're going to tell the truth. I don't care how it hurts. That clip there was Elon Musk on Joe Rogan talking about how NGOs, non-government organizations in this country, are being funded by your tax dollars. And he picked out George Soros there because George Soros' organization has become a huge user of pop-up NGOs. You've heard about it. The EPA chief, Lee Zeldin, has talked, he's found $20-something million in that. It could go into the billions in these little pop-up NGOs. That one year they had $100 in their account, and the next year they had $2 million. So it's critically important. And the three we're talking about today, two of the three I was able to confirm, get some tax dollars as part of their funding from U.S. tax dollar grants. When you look into them, and I use the Data Republican account's website, Data Republican on X, who is one of the people, actually the person that broke the story about USAID and funding these NGOs. My guest today is entrepreneur Holly Kaysen, who's also the founder of the Election Integrity Project that is being sued by the NAACP, League of Women Voters, and Mi Familia Vota, these three NGOs. They're using our tax dollars to do it to you. That's the thing that bugs me. I don't care if it's even like $10. That shouldn't be allowed.
Well, how it works is the USAID funds these NGOs, and it has for decades. And then what the NGOs do is they take that USAID money and they wage lawfare on any of their political opponents or any cause that they disagree with. And it's actually a fundraising business model for these NGOs. They turn their dollars, just like George Soros did. He turns $10 million into $1 billion over time. And this Lawfare is one of the ways that these NGOs do it. Now, if you were mad about USAID funding NGOs, this gets even worse because NGOs have an unfair legal advantage under a 1978 Supreme Court precedent called the Christiansburg Standard. And what it assumes is that if these NGOs are bringing lawsuits, it assumes that all of these lawsuits and these NGOs are bringing these suits in good faith. So automatically they're given a pass scrutinizing the legitimacy of these lawsuits. Now they can go through the entire process and lose badly, like they did in our case at trial. I mean, we absolutely humiliated them and their case fell apart completely. But when we went to go retrieve our legal fees, we found out about this Christiansburg Standard that protects these NGOs from any financial downside. So the impact of that is, this is the reason why we see so much lawfare from these NGOs. It's because they know inherently they're protected from any financial risk.
Now, is that for every kind of case that they bring, or is it just certain types? Like in your case, I'm pretty sure they use civil rights as the prop, right?
That's exactly right. Any case brought under civil rights laws get this automatic pass for having to risk any financial downside.
Yeah. So you won at trial. Talk about the trial a little bit, Holly. Folks, I mean, we've mentioned a couple of little snippets of it, but I always like to hear the story from one of the defendants when they win outright. So tell us about that. How'd that go for them?
Well, that was the first time I had been in trial. And so the trial started off, and the plaintiffs, obviously, they make their case first in a trial. And the plaintiffs brought up Sean Smith first, Colonel Sean Smith first. And he testified for about a day. And where the plaintiffs really tried to hammer Sean was on his speech. But then their next witness was Ash in America, Ash Epp. She went second, and she was a pro se litigant, which was really interesting because she was on the stand. Some, legal experts or, legal aficionados are probably wondering, hey, wait, how did that work? If she's on the stand getting cross-examined, does she object to herself or object for herself? And she actually did have to do that. But the judge also helped with that. And my lawyers and Sean's lawyers also, worked in conjunction to help her out through that. That was kind of a bizarre thing. And then the plaintiffs brought their lead plaintiff, who is Beth Hendricks from the League of Women Voters. And Beth absolutely got destroyed on the stand. And it was, from our side, my lawyers, I believe it was just a very elegant takedown. It wasn't a lot of shouting and screaming. It was just asking the right questions and surfacing the facts. Now, at that point, the judge was starting to lose patience because she's seeing that the case is falling apart. The plaintiffs aren't making any headway in their case. And so she brings all of the lawyers up to have a, sidebar. And it was kind of odd because it was a bench trial. She didn't really need to do that because there wasn't any jury there. But anyway, she brought them up, and I found out later that she absolutely admonished the plaintiffs and said, hey, look, there's only one other witness I want to hear from. You better get her on the stand. And that was me. Mm-hmm. So the plaintiffs kept kind of shuffling things around, delaying getting me on the stand because they knew they were in trouble. So eventually I got on the stand, and, my testimony, it's hard to even remember what you say up there. You kind of go blank. But I know that nothing really surfaced out of it. They brought some press clips from things that I had said in the press, and it was almost unrelated to the case. So the judge, after that point, required everybody to submit a 52C, which is a motion for a directed verdict, which means the judge had heard enough from the plaintiffs. She believed that they hadn't made their case, but there's a few technical things that you go through at that point. They could proffer some more evidence just without calling people to the stand. And it turns out we got dismissed that night. And the next morning at 9 a.m, she ruled in our favor.
Now, I've got a question from the audience. I want to let that go, and then I can ask my next question about this, because it's interesting, very interesting that she let it go that far. Okay, Shell, who's got a question over there?
I do, sir. Ms. Hawley, from my understanding, you said before that these plaintiffs were recruited. Who recruited them, ma'am, and how does that happen?
I'm not entirely sure. It from what we know in discovery and the privilege logs, what we saw is the first meetings with the League of Women Voters plaintiff, Beth Hendricks, the lead plaintiff in all of this. It looks as if the national counsel from the League of Women Voters, this woman named Selena Stewart, was the one who brought this case to Beth Hendricks and proposed whether or not the league in Colorado wanted to be the plaintiff. And I don't know where the initiation for Selena Stewart was to bring this case. What it ended up to be and how they substantiated this case was based on news reports, which everybody knows is hearsay, and news reports aren't evidence. They really can't be entered in court. So I'm guessing maybe media reports. I don't really know how they decided to bring this case.
That's interesting. The question that came to my mind as you were talking initially is you mentioned right out of the gate that they went after Sean, the retired colonel, about his speech. Do you remember what about his speech and your speech too? Were they trying to bring into court to make their case? I mean, free speech is free speech.
To link free speech or Sean's speech as being incendiary and being violent rhetoric that was a predicate for intimidation. And they really leaned as hard as they possibly could into saying Sean's speech was intimidating. Now, they had this video clip of Sean who was speaking on his own behalf. He was not even speaking on behalf of USCIP at a church in Colorado Springs. And he was talking about election fraud broadly. And he didn't mention anybody. He was just saying that he personally had evidence of election fraud. And he was talking about constitutionally, election fraud is treason, and anybody who is found guilty of treason after due diligence or due process, can, suffer the consequences of treason.
Yeah, death penalty, up to the death penalty.
Yes, exactly. And that's what they tried to use to really rope Sean into inciting violence, which objectively it's not. It was found in the court, not even close. And in fact, the judge's ruling said there was no evidence of intimidation found whatsoever.
Yeah, so the judge calls everybody back in the next morning. What did she say?
Well, she had written her ruling, and she went through the rationale for how she came to the decision. And there are a couple notable things that she said. She mentioned that she didn't like Sean's speech, but she said, free speech, this is the law. We certainly don't condone people talking about the death penalty. And then the other thing that was interesting is the plaintiffs really tried to connect our work to being racist and harken back to the origination of these voting rights acts, especially the KKK Act, as you mentioned earlier. So they had a civil rights professor who specialized in African American history, and he was on the stand for a while, and his function there was to bridge the gap, to say, yes, this harkens back to speech can be considered threatening to minority groups. If you're looking for some fireworks in this, one of the lawyers basically asked this professor whether or not he thought we were racists. And the professor was like, no, I'm not saying you're racist. I'm not saying you're racist. And then Sean's lawyer went on a little bit further and said, well, do you know that Sean has biracial children? And his stepbrother is biracial as well. And that was kind of the record scratch during that testimony, because it was completely embarrassing to the plaintiffs.
Yeah, I'm amazed that they even let this come into court. Be honest with you, we'll get to take our last break. We have one question left over in the audience at least. But in the next segment, Holly, I want to talk about where things stand now, what the future looks like, and do a little bit more with the censorship and the media and its craziness and how biased it is. We'll be right back with Holly Kaysen of the Election Integrity Project.
Hello, I'm Brandon House. Would you like to gain access to over 20 years of my radio shows, TV shows, my books? I've written 15 books, and most of those books are ebooks now. And we have conference DVDs, conferences where we filmed our conferences at the Ozarks, literally starting 20 years ago. It's all available in our archived vault. All you have to do is go to worldviewtube.com/vault, worldviewtube.com/vault, and for a reasonable monthly fee, you gain access to over 20 years of Christian worldview programming, news, information, books, documentaries, and a powerful search engine. And folks, it's a great way not only to educate yourself, equip yourself, but it's a big way that you can help fund our continuation as a broadcast network. Please check it out. worldviewtube.com/vault, worldviewtube.com/vault, and help us continue pushing out a Christian worldview.
The heads of NPR and PBS testified before Congress this week amid accusations of liberal bias. Should the government continue to send taxpayer dollars to public broadcasters? Well, a little background here. I mean, they've been after them the Republicans have wanted to get rid of PBS for as long as I can remember. This crowd will probably do it. I mean, I also read my namesake, Catherine Marr, was head of NPR, and, she said, we're completely unbiased. Give me a break, lady. I mean, they're crazy far left. So, I mean, I think we're past the age, really, where the government, first of all, why do we need to subsidize? Why can't we have outlets like this? And we're so polarized. These outlets became popular at a time when Republicans and Democrats didn't hate each other and weren't at each other's throats and didn't think each other was an existential threat. In that world, you can't have places like this, I think, anymore. They have to be private.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. It's Truth Thursday, and that right there, NPR's president, Ms. Maher, being told by far left communist, in my opinion, Bill Maher, that she's far left and that she's ignoring the reality of National Public Radio. And trust me, they are. And we're talking with Holly Kaysen today, one of the founders of the Election Integrity Project, who was sued by 3 NGOs her team was too, and we've talked about that trial, and they were acquitted at a bench trial with the judge because the plaintiffs embarrassed themselves trying to use things like the KKK law and all that. But here's the issue. NPR and other organizations like that, including the TV station clip that I showed at the beginning, they are extremely biased in this country now, and I'm not sure what side they're on. Holly, I know NPR attacked you guys and anybody that questioned the election in 2020 as extremist, white supremacist in many cases. They've done the same thing with January 6th defendants. I've had Chris Cooney, Marine Corps captain, retired, Purple Heart recipient, on my show several times, and we've talked about the articles they've done on him and his family even. And he's got little bitty kids and everything. It's just disgusting what we see in this country, and I wanted to give you the chance to, rip on him a little bit if you'd like.
The media, the far left media, as we know, was sponsored by USAID, and USAID had a complete agenda for destroying America from within. And the reason why USAID was funding all of these NGOs is because the NGOs were acting in a way they were the enforcement arm for the government, where the government was limited. The Constitution limits government power, but when they fund these NGOs, then the NGOs can work outside of the Constitution. And it's part of a bigger mechanism. Yes, it's about free speech, but think about why they wanted speech and any dissent, especially about 2020 shut down. It's because they needed to have a narrative to sell the American public on the fact that Joe Biden won the presidency. It was not just, winning at the polls or having election fraud cases shut down. They needed to make his win believable. And as we've looked throughout history, back a few decades, we can see now how much this propaganda has sold us a bill of goods in terms of how popular leftist agendas are, or how rife with racial strife we are in America, or how, people supposedly like me are going out intimidating voters. That press arm is extremely useful, and it's a key tool for these NGOs. And then if those leftist agendas aren't propagated, especially by outlets like NPR or the Associated Press, the justification for these NGOs falls apart, right? People won't donate if they don't believe that these problems that these NGOs are fighting exist. And that directly connects to why Lawfare is so important to them as a fundraising tool, but also as a way to make their own news, to keep the agenda and the narratives alive, the false narratives.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that we live in a country like that. The other thing that they're doing is, remember what we learned in school in history class. If you had a good history teacher, they taught you right out of the gate that history is written by the victors. And that's what the Biden people were trying to do, was write that history of lies throughout the entire 4 years. And they never dreamed that Donald Trump's administration would get to come back into office after 4 years of thinking about what they were going to do. But we got a question over to you, so let's go ahead and take that, and then we'll wind it up. Go ahead, Joe.
We have cookies, sir.
Good afternoon. I had a couple questions. One, was their standing ever challenged in court before it went? And then, since all of this has happened, and even now with those going through and basically dismantling USAID, have legislators, either statewide or nationwide, reached out to you to develop some laws so this kind of stuff doesn't happen anymore?
To your first question, yes, standing was challenged. And in our appeal for our legal fees that were denied under this Christiansburg standard that I mentioned earlier in the hour, we are using that appeal to overturn the Christiansburg standard. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity because we can overturn this law through the courts rather than having to rely on Congress to act. They're pretty busy. They've got a lot going on, and I think we're going to be successful in our appeal. And the trick is going to be to use the courts to overturn the Christiansburg standard.
Yeah, that's a good goal. So just to be clear, what is the current status? Because you still have a Give, Send, Go account up. I apologize, I haven't mentioned it before. I intended to. They're still raising money for legal fees, folks. So go ahead, Holly. What's the legal status of the case right now, and what's the future hold, do you think?
Right. Well, we've filed our notice of appeal, and we are filing our actual appeal brief in about a month. And we're trying to raise $45,000. Our total is $60,000. We have $15,000 now. And this is to pay our lawyers to take this appeal, and we believe it may go all the way to SCOTUS. We've already put out $500,000 out of our own funds, between the three of us, between Ash, Sean, and I. And we are just desperate to see this all the way through so we can get to the ultimate goal of changing the law so that nobody else and no other organizations like us have to fight this lawfare on an unfair playing field. The Christiansburg standard was passed in 1978. That's a different era. It doesn't hold up today. And I think it's time for it to change, and I think we can do it.
Yeah, it does. What's the Give, Send, Go site? What do you call it? So we can get
the Give, Send, Go site is Stop NGO Lawfare.
Okay.
Give, Send, Go. Yep. Stop NGO Lawfare.
And I've had Holly's X account up. It's at C Holly with a Y. And the link, I think, is on your profile for that Give, Send, Go site too, folks. You need to go help them out, even if it's just $1.
Yes.
Spread this to your family and everything, because Americans, we have to take care of each other when the government abandons us. But we should expect the government to abandon us. This country and our ancestors and our founders all knew that government wasn't the best thing, and it's workable at best, and most of the time not workable. One more thing before we close it out. How have you, from this point going into the future, are you able to use your organization and the teams you have to affect positive change, or are you planning to do that with the Election Integrity Project?
This lawsuit completely wiped us out. Being targeted and tagged as being part of the KKK and being violent, a lot of people just did not have the stomach for it and didn't want to be associated with this, lawsuit and this malignment in the press. They were really worried. And for a long time in this case, USEIP was a defendant, but it got dismissed. So the case is only against Sean, myself, and Ash. I hope that if we can get through this, we can light it back up again, because it was a really unique organization because we didn't require using any money. That wasn't our goal. We figured out a way to do it for free and enable average citizens to take action and help support them and get them through. And we accomplished some amazing, amazing things by just banding together and working together.
Yeah, and this is a good approach to be able to talk with state legislators. That's where most of the election and voter roll law and those kind of things are made. to seek improvements in the integrity of the data and cleaning the rolls and those kind of things. I know here in Mississippi we've got a citizens effort that we're always asking to try to get that law fixed here, because the cleaner voter rolls are, the less fraud windows there are for the bad guys to jump through, and we know there are a lot of them. Well, Holly, thank you so much for coming on and talking about this case. It's very important, folks. It's amazing it's still going on, but, we got to get the law worked out.
Thank you very much. And thank you to your audience. I really appreciate it. Anything you can do to help donate or get the word out, everything helps. Thank you.
Stop NGO Lawfare. Go check it out at C Holly on X, and the link is there too, in case I got that wrong. Well, Monday is More War Monday, and we're turning to the domestic warfare that's happening right here inside of our country. You know him as Beard Vet. My friend Sean George is going to come on to talk about the swatting that's been going on and is still going on. I spoke to him yesterday, and there are swatting in that group that you saw on Fox a week or so ago that is still happening, and their families are getting hit too. So it'll be More War Monday, talking about the domestic warfare that we've got to put an end to, folks. This is stupid. I'll see you then.